Simon Sinek wrote a fantastic book called Leaders Eat Last. And the premise of the book came from experience he had when he spent some time with the US military. That, when out in the field on operations, in barracks, when there is centralized feeding, officers at last, the men at first. And I can absolutely, quantify that with my own personal experience, serving in the military. And it wasn't just officers, by the way. It was senior NCOs as well. So, sergeants, colour sergeants, sergeant majors, and so on. And the idea and the premise is that actually, you make sure that you look after the troops before you need to look after yourself. In business today, how does that turn up? How do we make sure that that's a part of being a leader in business? And how do you make sure that turns up? And the very simplest way is to model the culture as it would turn up in a leader. So if you've got a business, you're the leader, and you've had some say, or you've developed, or you seek to develop the culture in the business, then you need to model the behaviors that you expect to see. You can't have transparency and then have behind the door meetings. You can't say that there's autonomy and then make all the decisions. It's kind of it's leading by that example. Now, how can you start to develop, or maybe go and review your culture right now? And here's a quick trick for you. So one of the really good ways of doing this is to sit down with a team and just do a bit of an exercise. Now, this might be your leadership team, it could be your management team, it could be your board of directors, doesn't matter. But you ask the question, who models in this business, in this organization, who unequivocally models the values and the behaviors that we want to see in this business, the ones that we have up on the wall? And then ask them to write down what exactly it is that they model as a result of that. So they then write down all the points of that particular individual. And that individual is somebody that absolutely, if you cut them in half, they'd be like a stick of rock. The colours, the brand, the business would run right through them. And you'll probably have someone like that in your business. Then ask them to do the antithesis of that. Is kind of who if we lost them, if we missed them, if they weren't here, we wouldn't miss, because they don't do that. They don't model those behaviors. And do the same exercise. Ask them to write down what that looks like. And then here's the really interesting part. In terms of those two areas, those two individuals, and we don't name them, there's no need to name them, although every time I've done this, whenever they start to discuss it, they always seem to know exactly who the individuals are. Beside that, then write a list and a description or an account or behaviors and values in relation to yourself and those two individuals. In other words, where do you sit? Once you've done that, discuss. And what you'll find is values that you're missing, the behaviors associated with those values that you're missing, and how to bring them to a head, and how to start to look at implementing them in the business. And it's just a good way of starting to get that focus of leading by example, but creating, as a result of that, creating the culture that you expect to see and want to see around the business. Have a great day.